much light, but I'm not at home. I'm not in my
Oh,
usual office.
oh, that's okay. That's all right. Listen, what I'm going to do is just press record, and we'll just do
Sure.
just a pretty standard interview, and then I will edit. I will upload it to my
Sure.
channel, and then what I want to do is be able to promote your book, and I'll put a link for that there as well.
Thank you. With
So
pleasure.
I think that'll. So let's see if I can get this going. All right. It looks like we are now recording.
Excellent. Well,
Welcome,
thank you.
Piero San Giorgio.
Thank you.
How are you? You're in Switzerland, yes?
I am in my farm in the mountains of Switzerland. Yes.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. How is life in Europe right now?
Well, everyone's at home, and I'm lucky to be as I planned for so many years. That in case of an emergency or crisis, my family and I would be in, first of all, a beautiful place, but also a place where I can have as much autonomy as I can, growing my food, having everything I need, my neighbors. We stay a little bit far, but we still chat and enjoy the village life, even if it's with some distance. But it's a safe
Yes.
place and a place to go through these kind of crises for what we foreseeably still at least 1 month to go, at least.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. People who are preppers and survivalists are usually considered outcasts until times like this.
Yes, it's as I was telling on an earlier interview, we are like Cassandra. Uh, we say the obvious that crises do happen and eventually they do hurt, but no one wants to hear that because this is uncomfortable. And as everything in life, people don't want to hear uncomfortable information, whether it's truth or not, but or in this case potential. But eventually, crises hit. Sometimes it's a crisis like this one. It could have been worse, and so we have to be responsible and accept that I'm not gloating. I'm not telling people I told you so. This is not the time to do that. This is a time to act, to help others, to use the advantage that people like me who have prepared, who have written books about these things, to actually go to our neighbors and say, well, look, if you need anything, if you need antibiotics, if you need toilet paper, if you need food, if you need anything, if you need to have a chat, we can sit, a few yards apart, and we are here. In fact, that's what we do. And it's a quite peculiar situation, obviously, that the whole world is being quarantined. That's quite amazing. But we have to play the game. It's not the time to blame. It's not the time to tell, I told you so, even if it's true. I did tell everyone that these things could happen. I wrote a book about it, specifically on this. But it is a time to create community. It is a time to help. And it is a time to see the people around us to make sure that they are fine and they're not doing anything wrong, or that they're not in need.
Yeah, well, you are one of the world's most prolific experts in survivalism, if that's a word I can use,
Yeah.
and definitely the top writer, theorist, and practitioner in all of Europe. How would you introduce yourself to my audience?
Well, I'm a Swiss citizen. I've been writing for the last 10 years on something that I predicted, which is that eventually we are growing into a system, economic system, that is going to be more and more fragile, or at least more and more prone to be disturbed, to be shaken by events such as a financial collapse, such as an epidemic, such as an industrial, climatic or industrial incidents, accidents, and that regardless of what will happen, because eventually these events will happen as they do happen, well, the question is, how do we cope and are we ready for this? So when people ask, what's the definition of the survivalist, maybe my European and Swiss definition is one of being a responsible citizen, and which for me is being a responsible adult, which is that a responsible adult thinks about what could happen in the future, prepares for it. It's not an obsession. It's not a paranoid approach. It's just the common sense approach, is that there's always been epidemics, there's always been wars, there's always been failures of the economic system. Therefore, you plan by having as much autonomy as you can, by having some storage of goods that you need just to go through the difficult times. This can be cash, it can be financial means to cope a few months without a job, without payroll. It could be having some food. It could be having some medication if you have, chronic illness, or if whatever you need. You need to have time, but also you need to think about how you can be self-sufficient towards an economic system. And this can be maybe having different sources of income, maybe having a job where you have, where actually it's not a job, where you're self-owner of what you do. It means developing skills of excellence that makes you, as you are, for example, you are requested by people all over the world for your expertise and your wisdom and your knowledge. And this is something that is, it's not an overnight success. It's something that it's a lifelong overnight success. It is something that you build up over time, and we never stop. We always learn. And this is basically a way of life that is not like what the media usually caricature of living in a bunker, being paranoid. On the contrary, we are very open. We are part of networks of people in the village, and in fact, after a while, you even forget of this label of survivalist or prepper, and you just live a life. And that's what I'm trying to do over the last 15 years, and I'm doing that among other things, among being a father, among being a husband, among being a citizen, and of course among being a writer as well.
I like the list that you gave: father, husband, citizen, and I like how you prioritize that. Like that.
Well, yeah, I should, and I should have added to be a man, in the sense that you must first care and love of yourself so that you can be a good father, and and then a husband is after that, because you can your kids really need you. The children are dependent of you. Therefore, it's your strong responsibility to take care of them. I have 4 kids. And from 6 to 14, so the small ones, they still really need a lot of care. And now, of course, we're homeschooling them now, so it's a lot of work. I'm super tired to do four kids, 4 ages at school at the same time as you have to do everything else, cooking, cleaning, and so on. So it's quite a busy time. Not much time to write or read right now. But
yeah, I had tweeted something recently where I said, you can't teach somebody to be calm. What you do is you model calmness, and then they emulate you, and then that's contagious. I notice as a prepper, as a survivalist, as a professional that teaches people how to survive, you are very calm.
As much as I try to have a non-violent education on my kids, and I owe this to Stefan Moliner, believe me, sometimes it's very difficult to be calm with 4 kids roaming around the house, and we're lucky that they can go outside. There is miles of woods and fields that they can go and play outside even today. But sometimes, I can tell you need discipline, and sometimes they need to remember that you can be a werewolf to them if they don't do
Yeah.
if they push you too far. So it's not easy. And there's no training to be a father. It's difficult, but you have to do it as best as you can. So
Yeah. One thing I noticed about this virus, this pandemic, it's not just biological. There's an economic factor that comes along with it. Talk to us about the economic implications of a pandemic.
So here's how I got to that. My first few books were bestsellers, and they were talking about economic collapses. What if for a financial crisis or a lack of natural resources, scarcity of natural resources, the globalized economy collapses. And then I was contacted by someone who was a specialist in nuclear, biological, radiological, and chemical events from the elite special forces in France. And he said, look, your books they lack this big element, which are, nuclear war. What if there is an epidemic? What if there is a chemical accident and things like that? And he suggested that we write a book. We wrote a book together, which we did, and it came out in 2016. And the media completely considered that, nuclear accident, that can never happen, of course,
Right.
Chemical plants exploding like Bhopal in India, like Seveso in Italy. That's not going to happen anymore. And of course, pandemic, this is something from a fairy tale, pandemics never happen, of course. Now we have one.
Yeah.
And so from January this year, I followed very closely, as I do every week. I check what is the World Health Organization report on epidemics in the world, and I was following the current Ebola one in Zaire, and I was following the MERS-CoV in the Middle East, and suddenly there's this new one coming out from China, and while the media was concerned that we were calling it the Chinese flu or whatever, I was starting to count the exponential growth. And I was starting to calculate from the data we had from China, which is very unreliable a little bit, how this thing is growing. And obviously now we all know, as it's inevitably spread across the world and it's hurting and hitting everywhere, that we know that if you look at the data, it is a very contagious virus, but it's not a big killer. And yet, it is overwhelming the hospital systems that we have. And that was predictable. And actually the way authorities have reacted to this has been very slow, and they did too little too late. But again, it's not the time to blame. Now we have to really act on this. However, the problem is that if you want to slow down, as I think everyone who watches news finally understood, because even the news finally understood how is the nature of this, well, you have to slow it down by asking people to reduce the contacts with each other. And that's logical. And it will be reduced with that. It will work, of course. However, by doing that, you severely kill the economy. You severely damage the economy, which is made of transaction between people, which is made of consumption, which is made of manufacturing, and therefore people going to their jobs and so on. So we are inflicting ourselves a very severe economic damage to help our hospitals and the people who work in the hospital, who are really dedicated people. And it's very important to remember how dedicated and how hardworking these people are. Even if the system is really not far from being perfect, the people who work are usually very motivated and very hardworking people, and they put their own health in jeopardy for the common good, and it's quite respectable. And so we're going into a major recession, a major potentially an economic collapse, which is going to be prevented by the injection of this new created money in the economy, which is basically pushing the problem further in the future, because we cannot just create money without consequences. And the level of money that has been created over the last 20, 25, 30 years has been enormous. And now we are just adding another enormous amount of what is fake money into the economic system, but we have no choice. The interest rates are at zero, and we cannot kill the economy just to be, let's say, economically orthodox. We can't. And so we are going to have a much bigger problem in the near future, but at least we are saving the current system for a few months. And I must say there was no alternative to that at this point. So in fact, we are starting, I think in the US, you are probably 2 weeks in a way behind the cycle, behind the curve than Europe. And Europe has been a month and a half behind China, or 2 months behind China. And so in China, they are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. In Europe, we might soon start to see it. And therefore, in the US, in 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to start to get that there are good results of this. And so we can hope that by the summer, eventually the economy starts again to move. And it's just going to be 2 or 3 months, difficult months ahead. But we are lucky that it's not a big killer. This is not Ebola. This is not the Spanish flu. This is basically something that kills 1% of the population. It's severe, but it's nothing compared to what has happened in the past during past epidemics. So I know it's difficult to hear that when I say we're lucky, but consider the Black Plague that killed half of the people, half of everyone you know died if you were living in 1348. And the Spanish flu was 4% of the population who died, which is quite traumatic. So we are in that way, in that sense, we just have to stay home for a while. This is not being in Vietnam. This is not being in the trenches of World War I. This is not being bombed during World War II. We have to take this into account to understand that in fact we are quite lucky.
We talked about the biological impact, the economic impact. What about the emotional impact of a pandemic? We've never seen anything. We've never seen mass reactions on a scale like this. Emotionally, how does the world deal with this properly and maintain calm and sanity?
It's a very wise and uncommon question, and it's probably the most important one, because we humans are very emotional beings. We're not instinctual; we're emotional. And these emotions work very much on, first of all, on fear, which is a very powerful emotion that, if it's left unharnessed, can be very damaging to us by creating anxiety, by creating, in fact, illness. And the media has always been playing on this. By the way, the fear that we have, the fear level in our society is way too high. It's damaging to many people. And so it can also spark reactions of aggression, and very unwise reaction of panic, which are really unwelcome in this time. We have to be calm. I've said since the very beginning of this crisis and every one of my interventions that we have to be no need to panic. This is once again, it's not. It's going to be an experience that is maybe difficult for many, but it's not the end of the world at all. This is not the apocalypse. This is very manageable. You have internet, you have Netflix, you have books to read, you have there's still food in the supermarket. This is not going to be there's not going to be breakdowns in the supply chains, because so much money will allow people to be paid without having to work, people to pay the rent without having to. So it's gonna be doable. So we don't need to have fear. But there's a lot of other emotions that will come into play, especially when people are need to stick in the same house for a long time. First of all, I know that you and I have this ability of being very happy alone if needed. and a lot of people can't. A lot of people, will be alone, and they really don't like that. On the other spectrum of the emotion and relations, you have people who are running away from each other in work, in activities, even if they live together, husband and wife, parents and children, who are under the same roof, but in reality they never see each other for many reasons. Many of them is they don't want to be seeing each other, and now they will have to live together for a few weeks, maybe a few months, and so I actually predict a lot of divorces and a lot of perhaps more drama, but certainly it is something that we'll have to learn. We'll have to rediscover why we actually chose to live with that person or that person. Why do we have children? Maybe we have to start to learn who they are, because in today's world, it's crazy. We have.
Yes.
It's not our case. It's certainly not my case, but it is a risk for many that we end up not knowing who we live with, and this is not what humans are designed for. We are designed to be social beings that interact with good friends, with the family, with enlarged families. This is what brings us security, safety, reassurance, and we are forgotten in the West, and especially in the towns, in the big cities. So we'll have to rediscover that, and remember that in the mid 50s and early 60s, when the US had these nuclear shelter programs, they decided that you needed to have 2 weeks of food in the shelters. And when people ask why 2 weeks and not more, they say, well, because 2 weeks is the maximum amount of time that people confined together can stay sane. After that, they will want to get out anyway. And so that's why and that's why the Iran Corporation suggested 2 weeks to be an arbitrary amount of time. But in reality, you probably needed a bit more to be safe. But if you cannot stand to be in the same shelter together, okay, we're not in shelters. We can still go outside. We're still in our home. We are in a very luxurious situation compared to what could have been or what could be. And once again, I know a lot of people are in small apartments in urban areas, maybe in bad neighborhoods. It's not safe. I understand. Don't want to generalize. Not everyone has prepared like I did to have a place in the mountains where not only is it safe, but you can also have a very fantastic environment for you and your family. But these elements of emotions are very important. And in fact, my next book is going to be on how you manage your own fears. And so I'm deep into this topic, and I'm trying to find if I have fears in this kind of time, and trying to listen to how you react. There are so many ways you can manage that. First of all, is you try to use those fears to do things, to act. You fear to be alone. Well, you try to interact with people. Okay, now we have distance, but we can still use the internet. You feel anxious. Well, maybe you learn to relax. You can learn by doing exercise, by doing breathing, by doing yoga, meditation. There's so many things you can learn in those situations and use them to better manage your emotions. Maybe you learn to talk with the people you live with, talk with your children, talk with your spouses, have deep philosophical conversation on who you are, what do you want out of life. All these conversations you haven't had for so many years. And if it doesn't work, because sometimes you can't stand, well, you have to say, well, look, we're going to have to do a truce. I'm going to have to do some effort, and you're going to have to do some effort, because we can't go anywhere. So we have to really think of what is best. And maybe it's a truth. Maybe it's to say, well, look, maybe we don't expect anything, but when there's a problem, we breathe in, and then we talk to each other politely, and we try to explain. It's not easy. I can imagine it can be difficult in some situations.
The thing that popped out at me was when you said this is a very manageable situation. That's the first thing. The second thing was the 2-week limit of being in a bunker for 2 weeks. Sure, we could stockpile 6 months worth of food, but we can only live together for 2 weeks. Amazing.
Mm-hmm. What's your experience so far in your town?
I am stocked up. I'm not working. My salon where I cut hair is closed down. My virtual business, online business, is doing well. Most of the people I know are under lockdown, quarantine. Most of the people I know thought that I was a little crazy being the prepper that I am. And now they don't think I'm so crazy anymore. And I have remained calm. I am the guy that is modeling calm and sanity, clarity, and reason for my family, for my audience. And I find it to be very manageable. I have zero panic, none whatsoever. Good. I'm completely ready. And a lot of people confuse preppers with stocking up food and water. It's so much more than food and water. And all right, I'm going to stop this recording, and then I'm going to call you right back because I think we're at the very end. Skype is telling me that I need to stop. I'll call you right back, and we'll finish this. Okay.
There it works. Good. Well, I'm glad you and your family are going through this fine.
Yeah, we're doing well here.
Good.
One of the things I've noticed is that, like I had said prior, prepping is so much more than just stocking up on food and water. There is an economic element. There is a physical element. There is which we're going to talk about. There is an economic element, an emotional element. Let's talk about the physical. I see a lot of videos on YouTube and Instagram of people, how to work out in your home and how to stay in shape in your home. I've never seen that before. Let's talk about that.
It's amazing. I think it's great that people realize that part of, using the time that you suddenly have, I mean, for the people who don't have 4 children like me, and you need to do the school for them and the rest and cleaning and cooking and all that. People who have too much time, well, they need to have, to use that time to read, learn, but also indeed do exercise, keep in good physical shape. Like prisoners do in prison. You have to exercise and keep in shape, which is also, by the way, the best way to combat any illness, which is to have a strong immune system. And that is what makes the difference between being ill and usually not being ill. Because this is, these viruses are part of, this is nothing new. It's, and the reason 1% of the people die and 99% of the people survive this is because 99% of the people have still a fairly good immune system. This is how it works. And especially if you're fit, if you're young, it's easier. And learn to exercise, learn to do stuff. I'm discovering there's so many school channels where children can learn, do math, do physics, learn whatever language, and online, if so that I can leave them for a few minutes while I do something else. And we are also doing, one of the interesting things that is unsaid at this point is that through history, epidemics have fundamentally changed the culture of societies they went through. First of all, is because you realize that life is dear and that actually is precious. Second is, sadly, you see people you love who die. And you realize, as the Latins would say, memento mori, remember that you are mortal. Remember that life is precious, and therefore you must value what is good out of it. And usually it's not spending time at work or in a job you hate. It is much more than that. It's people that you love, it's children, it's family, it's achievements. There's so many things that we are supposed to do in life instead of doing stuff that is mediocre. So it's a very strong reminder of being alive, of enjoying life. It's also sometimes bringing cultural changes that are very difficult to foresee. In this case, for example, one thing that seems obvious to me is that, a month ago in the UK, the top headlines was of a non-binary guy who couldn't find a hairdresser for his gender. And he thought it was, and the media was saying that this is really not nice, that a society cannot accommodate for someone who is different and does not have a specific gender and needs a special haircut, hair salon. Well, obviously now, all these crybaby topics of gender, feminism, all this stuff that had made no sense at all, now is gone. And people don't want to hear about this and never want to talk about this anymore for a long time, because they have real fear of running out of toilet paper, obviously, and of food, and also of getting ill, because the media used to say, oh, this is nothing, and now it says, oh, it's very dangerous. So it went from one opposite to the next, and it's scaring people. And so people, when they fear for their life, a lot of other topics become completely irrelevant. And so this maybe will shake us back into a society that focuses on the real issues, education, the size of government that is way too big, what the real economy should look like, instead of all these safe places and microaggressions. All of this is going to be thrown away for a long time. I think this is a foreseeable cultural change. But there are many. For example, think of the Black Plague of the 14th century. It completely changed Europe. Because when you have half of the population who dies, suddenly there's no more poor people for a while, because people inherit from their families, and suddenly the individual becomes scarce and becomes precious and therefore demands rights. And so you have a whole cultural revolution that puts the individual in the center of the society, instead of having some abstract thing that is society. We also have the belief in the omnipotent God that is shifted, because suddenly a very pious population has not been protected by God. Therefore, maybe God is not that important, or it becomes not central. It becomes a private. It's something private and not something public. And so the society changed, and then you have Reformation, and then you have the Protestant work ethic, and then you have Europe dominating the world for 4 centuries. Completely unpredictable, in fact, and unlikely in reality when you look at the dynamics of the time. So it's impossible to know what's going to happen in the next 6 months, in the next 10 years, out of these epidemics. Maybe homeschooling will become big again, because people will realize that it's doable, and children learn more faster without being in an environment full of retards. And I'm not saying necessarily it's the children who are the retards in that environment. Maybe it's the teachers. I don't know, or the other way around. Who knows? But there could be changes that we don't foresee that easily.
Yeah, all right. So we talked about economic, emotional, economic. We touched on theological even.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the social media and pop culture memes. I've heard some, people making jokes about toilet paper. Why a rush on toilet paper? If anything, there should be a rush on water.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was funny because I understood in February that I'm not in the I'm not in the target of the virus. I'm not the hardest target. I'm fairly healthy. I'm not that old. Well, getting old. but my statistical chance of dying is probably one point less than 1%. So it's okay. And so I went out the last few days to look a little bit what are the people rushing to buy, and indeed it was flour, rice, pasta, and indeed the proverbial toilet paper, which is an interesting sign that our society is probably has gone back to the anal stage of childhood, which is normal. You know, I mean, most people have emotional maturity of a 3-year-old, and
Yes.
and so yeah, you need toilet paper at that age, but at any age. But you know, we have showers, so
Yes.
if you don't have toilet paper, you find another way, and then you have a lot of bad books that have been written, so you can use them. But more seriously, I bought some stuff in the last few days. I bought oranges from Sicily, and lemons, and bananas, and mangoes, because I'm not sure these things will be around the next few weeks. So I wanted that the kids and me to have fresh squeezed orange juice in the morning. I bought a few crates of oranges from Sicily, red, the red ones, and they're delicious. And I went to the pharmacies that I know, and I got myself a few antibiotics that just a few more that I needed. And then I went and I did buy some of those anti-malaria drugs because I already knew that there were reports showing that these had good results. I might not need them, and if I don't need them, I will make sure that some doctors have them if needed. And for example, I had stores of masks, quite a lot, and I certainly don't need them anymore. So I just went to the local hospital and have some friends who work in the ambulance emergency services, and I gave it to them because I don't need them. So I kept maybe 10, 15 masks just in case, but hundreds I gave away. And because now is the time to enable these guys who work hard not to get ill. So that's also, you prep to help others at the right time, because after all, the kids have no risk. I probably didn't catch it, and even if I do, it's going to be mild on us. So, and there's no reason I will catch it now. We're far away from everyone. So I went to buy some stuff, but not toilet paper. I have enough here, but even if you don't, water is more important. And here we have springs from the mountains, so we can even take a bath in the garden in the spring water. It's a bit cold. It's probably at 2 degrees or 3 degrees centigrade, but at least there's no problem of water. But priorities are strange for people, and it's always a bit puzzling on why toilet paper. And this is not the first time that during a crisis toilet paper is the number one commodity that gets bought. I don't know. Maybe it's something. It's a symbol of civilization, of luxury. I don't know. There's something probably deep intimate with that, which is not common in the rest of the world. In India, there's no use of toilet paper, and everywhere else.
Right.
It's a symbol of our hygiene, of the very advanced hygiene that we probably have.
Right. Now, are you open to podcasts and other people being on other people's channels?
Sure, I love that. I think it's
okay.
It's time to share. It's time to crossbreeding the audiences. First of all, because as you said, sometimes we've been caricatured, and people who prep have been considered by the media as some crazy lunatics and original people who, they're a bit, why store food? Everything is available. Well, until it's not. And
yes.
And once again, I stress what I say. It's not necessarily about storing. It's first of all, you store what you use, and you use what you store. But it's in my philosophy, what you store is just a temporary fix. But what you really aim for is self-sufficiency, which is a completely different strategy. And self-sufficiency means maybe you have your own garden, maybe you have your animals, chickens and rabbits, and you can do this as a hobby. It doesn't need to be your work. You don't need to become a farmer. You can have a bit of on the side of growing your own food, and learning the skills that go with that. Learning how to hunt, to shoot food, to put food on your table. You learn to grow your vegetables, and some people are surprised how, for many it's very easy. You plant a potato and then you have a plant and you have lots of potatoes in your soil. It's not that hard. Of course, it's hard to be fully living out of it, but no one said that you have to be 100% self-sufficient. You aim for it, but maybe you start with 5%, 10%, 30%. And little by little, in time of crisis, for example, one of the things I love to do is once a year I do 2 or 3 weeks of fasting. So 2 or 3 years of fasting is amazing for your body, first of all, but also for your mind. It gives you this confidence that you can go on 2 or 3 weeks without food if needed. I certainly have the reserves, but so when you feel a little bit of hypoglycemia during the day and you feel a bit hungry, it's nothing. You don't even have a mood swing after a while, because you know that you've done 2 or 3 weeks. If you've done 3 weeks without food, you have an incredible powerful mind, because you know that in times of crisis you just need water. And you know that after 3 days you won't even feel weakness. You will feel strong of not having food, because your body has switched to consume your fat, and therefore you can go on and run and do a lot of stuff without needing to think of food. And this is an amazing advantage. Very few people do that, and it's an easy exercise. It saves money, by the way, not to eat for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing people can learn how to do.
How can people find you? Where can they find you on the web? I know you have some books out there. Talk about what you have created, the resources that you have.
I have, of course, my website, and I'm switching everything to Patreon right now, because I'm a bit tired of the trolling and the immaturity of the social networks. So mostly on my YouTube and Patreon and BitChute and other platforms, I'm trying to move my audience there. I think most of my books are now translated into English, or are in the process of being translated into English. They're translated into many languages. I'm lucky to have readers from Turkish to Polish to Italian, Russian, French, of course. And I must promise to do more videos in English and more content in English, but because most of it is in French. But you can find on YouTube even quite old videos that are in English that I think are very relevant still today, on the strategy of how you prepare and what is the philosophy of it. And maybe I bring, maybe it's interesting for people who are in the US that have listened to many preppers and survivalist gurus in the US that have a very interesting experience. And it would be interesting for them to listen to also and read my books, which have a more Swiss, perhaps, approach, which is also one of a Swiss guru. But it's interesting then to mix and to change and to see both sides of the Atlantic, and to see maybe different focuses, and then they pick what is best for them, of course. So it's the best way is to go to my YouTube channel and certainly to go on Amazon and pick up my books, which I think have proven to help a lot of people get their strategy right.
Yes.
So yeah, and I'm told they're very well translated. So well, actually, I know I read them in English as well. So no, I think they have a very good translation, all of them. So they can be. And the recent one that comes out just now on nuclear and biological threat. First of all, it has a very good foreword by Dmitry Orlov, which is quite a famous guy in the world of predicting collapse. And I think it's a book that is very important, as it covers some of the big problems that we can face in terms of incidents such as nuclear, with the power plants. These things are usually safe until they're not. Problems with natural catastrophes, generating chemical plants bursting, things like that do happen already today. refineries burning, and there's all sorts of repercussion on people who live nearby that are very important to be prepared for. So it saves lives. I have now, after 10 years, I've got countless people saying, "You saved my life. You saved my family. We used to live in the city. Now we're far away." And indeed, this crisis shows that we are safe. And that's the most important feedback that I get. For me, this is what keeps me writing, because this is the best feedback, when people say, you really changed my life for the better, and that's worth more than the royalties on the books, which are tiny anyway. So that's really good.
All right. Well, this was a very productive talk, and I'm sure that people are going to want to find out more about you and the resources that you have. Thank you for your time. I know we have a little different time arrangement here, and I appreciate you coming on the show. And I look forward to seeing you, hopefully this coming summer, maybe in Poland. So we'll see.
I would love to. I think this summer is going to be a bit short for an event like that, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
But we will meet again for sure. If not in Philadelphia or Florida or somewhere else.
That sounds good. Thank you, my friend. You're looking good.
Thank you.